Great, so let's get started. I'm extremely excited today to be talking to two pioneers, two icons in the field of EMS paramedicine here in Montreal, Mr. Gary McHugh and Mr. Jeff Brown. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Pleasure.
So I guess jumping right into it, would you mind just taking just a brief moment just to introduce yourselves? I guess starting with Gary, a little bit about your journey and your story.
My journey was a long one. From about 10 years old, I was witness to an accident. I decided that I wanted to be able to help if ever I was in that situation again. Joined St. John Ambulance, became a senior instructor with St. John's, joined the military to try and further my medical career. That didn't work out. Came out of the military and found a first aid course in Montreal. That was the prerequisite for a paramedic program that I didn't know existed. So of course, once I realized that that existed, that was the route from there. So I took the first aid course, applied to the Dawson College paramedic program that was being run by Dr. Peter Cohen, associated with the Royal Victoria Hospital and with McGill University and with what else did I say? Dawson College. Yeah, and that's where I started and went up and up and up. 40 years later, over 40 years later, here I am.
Incredible. So throughout your career, you worked at Urgence Santé, correct?
I worked at Urgence Santé. I worked for the private companies initially. I was a student, first of all. I was going to school and working part-time on the ambulance. Worked for an ambulance service called Resuscicar. It had different names, but it was a private service. And then I think somewhere in the 80s, early 80s, Urgence Santé took over and ended up working as a paramedic with Urgence Santé, and then became a supervisor. And from there, years later, became one of the first official Quebec ALS, Advanced Life Support paramedics in the province of Quebec, all with Urgence Santé.
Incredible. So obviously we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that in just a few moments. We'll hear from Jeff Brown, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about your story.
Well, I think mine is very similar to Gary's. We all remember back in the 70s, those of us who were there, a TV show called Emergency, which was wonderful. I graduated high school and I said I was going to be either a pathologist or a paramedic, and I was right, because I was a paramedic. I saw an ad in the newspaper that the Royal Victoria Dawson College paramedic program was recruiting candidates. So I went up the hill to the Royal Victoria Hospital at the top of Pine and University, and went in and looked at it and said, sure, I'm going to apply for this. And met Peter Cohen, who Gary's already mentioned, who ran that program, who started it from scratch out of his previous experiences in Calgary. And he said, well, you sound like an intelligent little guy. Let's put you in the first course. And off I went. And that was well over 40 years ago. So did the same kind of background as Gary a little bit, working in private sector, working in the hospitals. Urgence Santé was created back in the late 80s, and that's when they took over the ambulances, and then they eventually took over the people working on them, and became a supervisor after that and stayed there for a whole bunch of time, and then did a few other things and came to work at John Abbott, and I've been here ever since. And part of the same group as Gary when they decided they were going to form or train the first, quote unquote, train the first group of advanced care paramedics in Montreal. Gary and I were part of that group. So we both have the official graduation paper from Durham College that says we're advanced care paramedics. So that's kind of special that some other people may not have.
Of course. So yes, we'll definitely talk about that there. So if you guys don't mind, I pulled a couple of photos. So this one of Gary. So I saw Resuscitar, I guess it started in 1977. Here, can you see the photo?
Yeah, the official program started in 1974. That was when it first began. And basically, it was the Royal Victoria Hospital wanted to train their what they called préposés at the time, because the ambulance service in those days would pick up a préposé from the hospital and then go and do a call. And so they wanted to train the préposés to an advanced level. It didn't make sense to run a paramedic program for whatever it was, 8 préposés. And so that's where Dr. Cohen decided, rather than just training the people in the hospital, they would actually open it up to other people as well. So that's how the program started. Jeff actually was in the very first program in '74, and I came in the next group, which was in 1978. But that picture there, that's yeah, that was in the very early 1980s, 79 or 80.
And do you remember what it was for?
What's that?
You remember the context of the photo, like where it was taken and what it was for?
Well, it was in the back of the ambulance. In order to run the program, in order to be able to do our ambulance shifts, Dr. Cohen actually worked it out to create our own ambulances, because ALS had never been done in Quebec before, and the goal of the paramedic program was to run an ALS program. It wasn't an ambulance technician program, it was a paramedic. It was a full-fledged advanced care paramedic system. And so they created 2 brand new ambulances that were large enough to operate. And this picture was basically to promote the company that went along with those ambulances, which was Resuscitar. And you can tell how old it is by the bottle of the IV, glass bottles. We haven't used glass bottles for a long time. I had one fall on the head of a patient at LaSalle General. I asked them to change the bottles to the plastic bags that we had, but they didn't want to anyway. It got changed once it hit the patient. So yeah, that's back. Yeah, that's quite a while. It was to promote Resuscitar and to promote the new ambulance. That was the context there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had done a little bit of research, and I guess back in 1976, and that loi de la protection de la santé publique that had come out, and yeah, so the ambulance driver, I guess, was a 40-hour course, and then they had an ambulance attendant or a préposé, which was the 150-hour, which I believe that's where it must come from, because I still get that question today. Oh, you drive the ambulance, or are you in the back?
Yeah, because
they made. Go ahead.
Who's going? Like it, because like I said, in the beginning, it was the ambulance drivers literally would drive to the hospital, pick up a préposé, and then drive them around. So it was the préposé from the hospital that was responsible for the medical, and basically the other girl, ambulance driver, or technicien ambulancier in French, was basically just a driver with maybe like a basic first aid course. So in the old days, when they called people ambulance drivers, they literally were ambulance drivers in those days.
Incredible.
Yeah. And they made the distinction at the time, you could do either, or you could do both. And there were some people back in the day who were only drivers. They didn't want to do the stuff in the back. They didn't want to touch patients. And that persisted well into like today's world. There are still some paramedics out there who never drive an ambulance because they were grandfathered in. Now it's you do both roles. You drive it and you take care of the patient. It's a combined role. The whole ambulance driver thing is now an insult to us. It's no longer a recognition that, yes, you're the guy who drives the ambulance. Now it's more of an insult because we do so much more out on the road.
Of course, I think it's incredible in terms of how much the profession has evolved in really a relative short amount of time as compared to other healthcare professions, such as nursing.
Well, we were starting from so far back. That's the issue. I was thinking about this, and for Jeff and I in the 70s being trained as an advanced care paramedic, nowadays 2022, the care that the patient is getting from us, for example, it actually went backwards, because we were doing more in the late 70s, early 80s than they're doing even now. However, if you look at Quebec, Montreal as a system, there's no question that the system has improved and has advanced. But for what we were allowed to do, if we were still on the road, we would be doing less than we did in the early 80s.
For sure. I guess now you have the ACPs who graduated from the 2-year major at the University of Montreal. So that's been, I guess you guys were also involved, or you were a pilot project that for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, that picture that you put up, that was my third. Well, yeah, that was my third time becoming certified as an advanced care paramedic. I was certified with the National Registry in 1982. I got certified with the National Registry as an advanced care paramedic. A few years later, Point Claire Fire Department wanted to train their firefighters as first responders / paramedics, and they asked me to be involved with their training. And in order, since Quebec didn't recognize the training that I had or that we had in Quebec, I actually got certified through Northeastern University in Boston as a paramedic so that I could train the firefighters and evaluate them and certify them with the National Registry. This, what you're looking at now, the picture, that's the graduation. So I graduated from Quebec's ALS course. That made number 3. And then Jeff was included in that group. We actually got certified a 4th. Well, I got certified a 4th time through Durham College in Ontario. So I've been certified 4 times as an advanced care paramedic, and it took many, many years to be allowed to use even a fraction of that training.
Of course, from my understanding too, I guess when the pilot project started, even though you were performing ALS, it was still limited in terms of the scope of practice that was allowed at that time.
When we first started, it wasn't limited because we were backed up by the Royal Victoria Hospital. Dr. Wayne Smith gave us certain of us, the ones that he considered qualified. Dr. Wayne Smith, Peter Vactor, there's quite a few doctors at the Royal Victoria who gave us the okay. And Jeff was in that group as well, and we could go on with the list the names, but we were doing everything that ALS allowed you to do. We were defibrillating, starting IVs, we were giving lidocaine, we were giving bicarb, which wasn't a good idea back then, but nobody knew better. We were starting dopamine drips, level fed in the field. That's what I mean. Like if you look at the system now compared to what we had done way back then, they're actually doing less than we did in the 80s. But you know, for the benefit of the province, yeah, it's advanced quite a bit. But we were doing less when we left Urgence Santé. We were doing less than we ever did in the 80s.
Sure, yeah. In the early 2000s, that pilot project was almost limited your ALS scope at that time.
Well, yeah, as soon as Urgence Santé came in, they tried to limit what was going on, because what they did was Resuscitar was actually running an advanced care paramedic company. We had defibrillators on board long before Urgence Santé knew what they looked like. We had them on board, and we were transporting to certain hospitals with the authority of the hospital, with the okay of the hospital, where we would bring in a patient with an IV, which just wasn't being done. Now, once Urgence Santé came in, we were doing advanced care, but the other companies were not doing advanced care, and that created a problem for Urgence Santé, because the patients would complain when we got Resuscitar. My dad got an IV, he got pain medication, and he had an EKG done in the back of the hospital. But when this company showed up, they didn't do anything except give him oxygen. So that created a problem. So Urgence Santé had to step in and limit the ALS that was going on, to eliminate the discrepancy, or what appeared to be the discrepancy in care.
I understand. And you both remember the time when police actually had the mandate for ambulances in the ambulance?
Oh yeah, we were doing it at the same time as the police.
Well, how did that work? Like, was there any conflicts that arose? Was there any issues, or?
The conflicts came at the end when they decided that they were going to once Urgence Santé was created, that they were going to take off the police ambulances. That's when the police started freaking out, because that was a really good job. There were a few people who had actually trained, one or two of them had actually trained with us in our program, but most of them had done maybe a first aid course. Like I said, some were a bit more elevated than the others, but most of them, it was just, it's a cushy job. You go to all the big calls because you're picking somebody up on a stretcher. They throw them in the back of this van and then they race to the hospital. There was not a whole lot of care given in the back of that vehicle. So they said once they got the ambulances coordinated with Urgence Santé, which is what it was originally set up to do, it was only the dispatch group that was set up first. Once they got that set up, they said, well, we no longer need the police because the ambulances will respond quicker, they'll respond faster. At the beginning, there were a few calls where you would get there and the cops are there, and who's going to take the patient? I never argued with the guy with the gun. The guy with the gun has priority, in case people don't remember that. But there were arguments. There were step away, this is our patient. So, okay, no problem, dude. Not my, you want to take it, go for it. You write it up and then you submit it, and that was it. And then eventually they just were no longer on the road anymore. So it was only the yellow trucks that were there. And it went well after that.
It got to a point where the police were giving the ambulance tickets for going through red lights, for carrying oxygen in the Ville-Marie tunnel. They were showing their disapproval by ticketing the ambulances for all kinds of different things. One of the paramedics got, actually on one call, he got 11 tickets. One for double parking on Dorchester, one for an illegal left turn, one for going in the wrong, all kinds of things. It was eventually in court. It was all dismissed, but the police, they really were not happy with the fact that they were losing their cushy jobs. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I'd love to play actually some clips from the Pulse. I believe obviously you're familiar with that recording. I can't remember exactly what year it is, but if you don't mind me just playing it, and maybe then you can add your commentary. So let me just share this again.
Oh, looks familiar.
But in a four-part house called, Kernhofer reports that some ambulance attendants at Urgence Santé say their skills are not being used properly. Great fanfare more than 2 years ago that the Levesque government unveiled Urgence Santé, a publicly run ambulance and mobile doctor service. It has already answered 500,000 calls in Montreal. Quebec acted late. More than 10 years before, hundreds of American cities began setting up paramedic systems that used the experience of the Vietnam War to train ambulance, fire department, and other emergency crews to stabilize the afflicted at the scene of a problem.
So do you remember what year this would have come out? Around?
Oh, late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
I don't know when this was 2 years after Urgence Santé, right? So we have to go back and look at the history. I think Urgence Santé was actually created
1989.
89, right?
89.
Was that 89 just Urgence Santé, or was it 89 they integrated the paramedics? They integrated the medics into their payroll. Because there were two steps. There were two steps in Urgence Santé. One was Urgence Santé as the coordinating center. And then the second one, the dispatch center. Then the second one was they took over the ambulances, the vehicles. And the third one was they took over the people.
Okay.
So
not 100%.
there are different timelines.
We'll definitely see ambulance in the news reporting. So I'm assuming we're at least at that second stage.
Yeah, it was certainly after Urgence Santé.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that was the beef, was that there were advanced care paramedics in Montreal, I happened to be around that time the president of MPAC, the Emergency Medical Technicians Association of Quebec. And I dealt a lot with Urgence Santé meetings, trying to get them to allow the advanced care paramedics to do more for the patients. So it would have been, for sure, Urgence Santé was there. We're missing a step as well, Matthew. I don't know if you want to cover that now, but there's a step missing in the process. So when Urgence Santé first began, there was no ambulance standards. Anybody who wanted to work on an ambulance just went and worked on an ambulance. They just applied for the job, took a first aid course, and got hired. Nobody was licensed. And so they got to a point where the government said, we're going to set up training, we're going to set up exams, and anyone who works on the ambulance will have to come to a Hunsick college, take the exam, and only if they pass will they get a license or a certification card that allowed them to work on an ambulance in the province of Quebec. So again, without knowing, like, I don't know the exact date of that. I thought it was close to 1979, 78 or 79 when I began. But what ended up happening was that the ambulance, and I'm not calling them paramedics because they weren't, the ambulance attendants in those days, they went to a Hunsick, they took the exam, and just to step back, I was the president of MPAC. I asked the government to allow Dawson College students to take the exam, even though they weren't necessarily working on the ambulance. Would they allow us to write the exam and get certified? And the answer from the government was no. From the health minister was no. If they're not on the ambulance right now, then we're not accepting them. The result of the process to certify ambulance attendants in Quebec, everybody was failing the exam. If they went with what they had proposed, there would not have been enough people to work on the ambulance. Everybody who was failing would have been taken off. So they quickly realized that, hey, if we do this, we're not going to have enough people. So they did two steps. They lowered the standards for the exam. They lowered the passing grade for the exam. And I got a letter as the president of MPAC inviting Dawson College students to write the exam. So we all ended up going and writing the exam, and needless to say, almost everybody who wrote the exam from Dawson passed and got certified to work on the ambulance. So that was the first time that any standards had come in at all. And the program then was 150 hours of basic first aid.
Yeah, exactly. From our perspective, they made that exam, but they never ended up enforcing it. So really,
well, yeah, it's yeah, we could tell you more like offline, like about the way the exam was run and how easy it was, but we'll leave that for another day. But the goal was at least there was some standard that was set up, and that in itself was a good thing.
So here, sorry, Jeff, do you have something now?
Emergency.
Shows that emergency popularized paramedics' work. Defibrillated time 2. He's still in cardiac arrest. 51 continues CPR. Start an IV with D5 2 amp sodium bar. And they provided a stark contrast with the vacuum and mobile emergency care that existed in Montreal. Paramedical courses were offered at Boston College in the 70s, but emergency medicine was ragtag. Police maintained a service with officers who knew little more than first aid.
Something there. I know you guys already touched on it, so we don't have to keep harping on this point, but I thought it was really interesting to actually get to see some footage of what was going on back then.
Yeah.
I want to fast forward here again. So it should come very shortly.
So-called Cadillac system.
Maybe it is more expensive, but also it's more secure. So you can give a diagnosis.
A group of Montreal ambulance attendants who claim to have advanced paramedical training also argued that on some occasions doctors arrive at accident scenes late. These highly trained ambulance attendants, stretcher bearer, basic first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
anything that is not considered an invasive maneuver, we're not allowed to put anything in the body. We're not allowed to start an intravenous, for example. You're not allowed to administer. It has the ability to do more, and yet that care, the advanced care, is still waiting for the doctor to arrive, which is 5 minutes later or more.
The law requires that senior ambulance attendants have 120 hours of training, while urgence santé requires double that. And urgence santé doctors say that training always needs to be improved.
You need, in order to work, to waste the at the scene of an accident or at the scene of a cardiac arrest, 3 highly qualified people, as qualified as people we work with in the hospitals.
Dr. Peter Cohen, which is now defunct program, and he estimates that there are only 6 or 7 such people among the 600 urgence santé ambulance attendants. Gary McHugh says the number is closer to 30. McHugh's group, the Emergency Medical Technicians Association of Quebec, charges that while their care is urgently needed, it's a quagmire of contradictory laws and rules. And caught in the middle is the patient's right to the best care possible.
Just watching that, obviously we've already touched on that too, but just the equity of care was obviously a big issue back then. And it's just incredible to see also how things were different.
It's like every time we do something in Quebec, we level everything to the bottom, to the lowest common denominator. We don't aim for the stars, we aim for the ground all the time. You know, Gary and I have been through this numerous times where you're trying to get people to move up and they just go, no, we're going to go down. So we treat everybody the same. So that can become very frustrating for somebody who's in the system.
Well, it shows the confusion, the confused people running the system. When that was filmed, like I said, as the president of MTAC, we had about 30 advanced care paramedics who were nationally registered. Because it wasn't in Quebec, it wasn't accepted. We had them write the national registry exam, which is accepted all across, well, like in about 49 of the US states. So they were all certified. So we had 30 paramedics that could have given better care to their patients. But like Jeff said, at that point, what you would have had to do was to increase the training of the other, 1,500 medics that were on the road, which the government went, oh no, it's much easier just to stop those 30 from making us look bad. So that's what they did. But now what they're doing now in let's say back in the 2018, I think it started, they're doing the same thing they could have done back in the 70s. They started with a little group of, I think we were 18 paramedics, 16 advanced care paramedics, and now there's 32, and now the number's growing. So what they're doing now is exactly what they should have done before, but patient care wasn't important enough to raise the standard right from there. So they decided to just block us. So they did everything they could to try and stop us from practicing. One of the things that you may not be aware of, Dr. Peter Cohen started the program. Coming from Calgary, he believed in advanced care paramedics. And you probably won't find any, but he went on the news knocking the doctors that were on the road, saying that they weren't qualified. You can't have a gynecologist doing emergency calls. And Jeff will confirm, Dr. Cohen got run out of Quebec because of his stance on we need paramedics and not doctors. They ran him out of Quebec. He opened a practice somewhere in Lac-Mégantic, if I remember correctly, spent a few years there in hiding, and then came back and got hired by Urgence Santé and was singing a whole different song, as you saw there. I wasn't angry with Dr. Cohen for doing that. He was fitting in where he could so that he could survive. He needed a job. And that's why he said in that news clip, oh, there's only about 6 paramedics. Now, we had 30 advanced care paramedics that I would have let work on me. We probably had 60 on paper, but medics that were really competent, we had about 30.
Oh yeah, that's why, because looking up, obviously I see the plaque of Dr. Cohen when I go to Urgence Santé, and obviously he's regarded as somebody who really pushed for advanced care here in Quebec. And then, yeah, watching that news clip, I was a little bit confused. So I like that.
Yeah.
I put some context there. And
Yeah, that's why.
okay. And all that being said, I mean, I'm pretty optimistic about the profession here in Quebec today. Yeah, while we might be behind a lot of provinces, I'm kind of seeing a little bit of what was starting to happen when I was in Nova Scotia. And it's almost like I feel like I'm in a time warp.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a culture change here in EMS. I'm pretty excited about what's coming, and it's great that we can participate in that today, even though it's taken probably much longer than it should have. And at the end of the day, it's it's our patients here that
Yeah, better late than never, right?
Better late than never, exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on, I guess I had some specific questions for you guys. More obviously, again, geared to our students here at John Abbott, but I guess having spent so many years in the field, what is one piece of advice, or a couple pieces of advice that you would give to anybody who's getting into this career, either as a new student and or as an entry practice paramedic?
As a new student, I mean, we talk about this once a semester or once a year when we meet our new students. It's a great profession. This is absolutely amazing that you can go out there and help people, and actually you can sometimes you make a huge impression. Sometimes you make a small impression, but you always make an impression. You always are doing something for your patient, and they'll say thank you once in a while, and that just makes your day. I mean, yeah, there's other stuff that you don't get. You may not get your lunch on time. You may not finish on time. You may get yelled at when you walk into a hospital because they're overloaded, they're crowded. We have to remember sometimes, though, that it's not us, it's the system. We do the best we can within the system we have. So we can always improve the system, but, take a step back. When the nurse is yelling, the question should be, why are you yelling at me? As opposed to yelling back, because she's had a bad day. Maybe she didn't have her lunch either. Maybe she's hypoglycemic. There's all sorts of things. So sometimes it's just take a deep breath, step back, and then go again. And sometimes it's like, that's all it takes, is to get somebody to reset and realize that they've been more angry towards you than you've been towards them. And you can get through the days, you can get through the system. You just have to take your time and breathe, because it doesn't, there are breaks.
Oh, I think we lost Jeff there from connection issues.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in there.
Yeah.
We had it, Jeff and I had it really hard, because we started off in a 10 out of 10 system where we didn't have a dispatcher, but when we talked about care for the patient, we were able to use every bit of our training to help the patient. And as the years went by, we were allowed to do less and less and less and less. Still had the knowledge. So imagine having the knowledge on how to save a baby and you're not allowed to do it, or having the knowledge to stop a seizure, but you're not allowed to do it. So for us, the system, because we had started off so high up on the care aspect, it was really hard for Jeff and I and for other advanced care paramedics like us. That was really tough. What I found the best way to deal with the way the system is going right now, and I mentioned Jeff and I's history because the new paramedics coming out, they've never had that. They don't know what it's like to have that. So they should have it even easier than we had it. And I would tell my students, if we made it through in that condition, you guys, there's no reason why you can't make it through as well. One of the things I learned that sort of saved me at one point, there was like a magic point in my career where I was either going to stay or go. And I woke up one morning and I realized, you know what, we have to stop taking on the burden of the system. I think Jeff touched on it. We have to stop, and we did that as paramedics. Not everybody can be a paramedic. you take up that. It's not for fame, it's not for riches, it's not because it's an easy job, because you really want to do good for strangers, and hopefully if it's somebody you know as well. And because of that, we as paramedics, we would take on all the burden of the system. We would take on the burden of, oh, it took us an hour to get here. We would take on the burden of, oh, sorry, I can't give you anything for pain because of the shitty system I work in, or we can't do this, or we can't do that, or, you know, I didn't have my lunch because of this, and so the patient would pay for it in some way. Very important that you take on your own burden as a paramedic, and that burden only exists between you and your patient. And as soon as you stop taking on the burden of the system, where, well, I'm sorry, I'm 16 minutes, you know, over the limit, but, you know, that's not my fault, so stop dealing with it. Apologize on behalf of Jean Santé or the service, but don't take on that burden. That's going to be really important. Like Jeff said, I think it's a fantastic job. People who get into it, who make it through the 3 years, who make it through the stage, I think their mind is made up that that's what they want to do. If they only last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, it's because they're taking on the burden of a system that's not growing at the same rate that the world around us is growing, and that can be depressing. So just stick with your own burden, and that helped me to hang in there over the 40 years.
What made you stay in the system, both of you, I guess? What made you say, okay, I'm going to stay here as opposed to going to the States or going to another province?
For me, it was family issues. I would have thought my family wasn't going to follow.
Most of the time it's family, and sometimes it depends on what's being asked of you or what you're asking of the other system. I mean, seriously, I looked when I graduated the first time, way back years and years ago, looking at going to the States. You could not get an application through, you could not get a green card through in the States because paramedics were so popular. So there was no way you could come in from outside the country. So you give up, you say, okay, well, this is banging my head against the door. Where am I going to go? Several years later, it changed and people went down and rushed down and started working and had a great career down there. That's cool for them. Translating between one province and another at the time, you had to start over. You had to start over. What you had may or may not have been recognized by somebody in an educational institute as the equivalent. But basically, you understand if you just spent 2 years doing something here in Quebec, you're doing another 2 years of it somewhere else to start over again. It's changed in the past few years, which again is an advantage to the system. When we put in a provincial licensing system here in Quebec, suddenly that allowed those people to go elsewhere. And quite a few people have done that and challenged the exams there and passed them. So the door has opened somewhere, but it wasn't really that open back in the day. It was more, you know, you're going out there. If you want to go to Edmonton, good luck. Go to Edmonton and then figure it out once you get there. Not really a great way to start your career, even when you're in your 20s, you know. So you kind of tend to, I don't know, you stay with the devil you know, as opposed to the devil you don't sometimes.
It was really specific to Quebec as well. Quebec had a reputation of doing their own thing. And because of that, they made up their own standards. Even right now, the ALS is not, it's not ALS like the rest of North America. It's the Quebec version of ALS. I went to Ontario to look into it. I actually did, I wrote exams in Ontario. I did hospital stages because I was going to move to Ontario and try and work there. You get to a point, I got to a point where, like I said, I wanted to get out. But later on, I decided, you know what, my family lives here. So if I leave, that doesn't help them. And so I decided that I would stay, but if I'm going to stay, I'm going to fight to improve the system. And that's what we did. The paramedics that were staying, we marched, we met people, we did interviews, we did radio shows, we did as many things as we can to improve the care for all of Quebecers rather than just, just abandoning. But those places that I went to, they mentioned to me that because you're from Quebec, we look at you like more closely because we know that the level of training is not up to par to the other provinces. So it could be done, but like Jeff said, most of the time, if you were coming from Quebec, you would have to start all over again. And in Ontario, they told me, for example, if you were coming from Alberta, you would have to do 6 months, and that was it, because of the uniqueness of our system at that time. We're talking again. I mean, it's early. I think the system is a lot better now, but the way things go, at one point, Matt, Hunsik changed the hours of training. They changed it from 100 and it went from 120 to 150. And then it went, I think, to 330. Well, when I heard that it changed to 330, I got a hold of the course outline, and it was exactly the same course, exactly the same, but they added hours. CPR, instead of 12 hours, CPR was like 24 hours. They just added hours, but the thing was the same. So it was hard to leave Quebec to go anywhere else.
Well, I think that's great. And I think that's a great lesson too for anybody who's in the program currently is, especially, I think it's important too, this is our home. Again, our friends and our family are here. I think it's in us, and I think it's part of our duty to be part of the solution and not just the problem.
Absolutely.
And obviously, a lot of the groundwork has been done by people like you. So, like you said before, making their job easier, and we should just keep running with that and keep improving the system, whatever which way, or not necessarily the system, but whatever we can do to make things better. And I do believe in my career lifespan, I do think that we will eventually see, I don't know if I'm going to have more gray hairs by then there, but that we will see a reciprocity process for the country.
Yeah. See, Jeff and I, we watched the system move backwards for such a long time that we probably didn't have a lot of hope despite fighting for it. But now I actually see that things like just the fact that they're licensing paramedics, that there's ongoing training now, because the old days you took your course, took your exam, and that was it. There was no CPR update. There was no updates in obstetrics or gynecology. There was nothing. And so this is what I'm saying. Like when you look at the system overall for the province, there's no question that it's moving, and I've seen it moving in the right direction. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that there's going to come a time where the training, the level in Quebec is going to be recognized as par or close to par with the other places. It's getting there. The ALS, I think, is going to make a huge difference. As ALS spreads through Quebec, that's going to make a huge difference.
100%. Jeff, did you have something to add there?
No, I absolutely agree. Gary's right. It's as things move forward. I mean, people say that it's not moving forward fast enough, but it's still moving forward. I mean, we started with how many medications? 0. I mean, not us. I mean, not Gary and myself. We started with this whole box of stuff that we could use. But as she said, the more they trained, the more they moved everybody down and down and down because they didn't want us doing that. So
that is one of the
when the paramedic starts with nitroglycerin and aspirin. And now we're up to giving midazolam for seizures, and we're looking at other stuff. Things come down the pipe, things get improved, things get better. It's a long, slow process. The big thing that holds us back here is the approval process, who we have to talk to in order to get the ability to allow us to do this stuff that we know how to do. The red tape is incredible.
Yeah, of course. So moving on to another question, I guess, what would be one of the most memorable moments that you had in your career? Where would like to go first?
I would tell you, Matt, the best part of this profession, the best part of being a paramedic, is that you end up at the end of your career, you end up with so many of those memorable moments that it's hard to pick one or two.
Well, I guess, I don't know if you remember, or I don't even know if you knew that the students would call us this, but it was story time. So unfortunately, most of the students now going through the program don't get to experience that. But would you have any stories, not necessarily a memorable one, Some
Well,
of the,
delivering a baby, if you look again, I mean, you know very well, most of the patients we deal with, most of the calls we deal with, someone is injured, sick, or dying. So to be able to go to a call where you can actually deliver a baby, and most emergency deliveries are normal, otherwise they wouldn't be coming out so easily. And that usually turns out well. I did a total, I did two as a paramedic, and then I assisted as a supervisor with two other ones where I was there helping out, handing things, and got to see it. But those are memorable moments. Had a couple where I thought there's no way this patient is going to make it, but we'll do our best. And wouldn't you know it, their pulse comes back and they start breathing on their own. And we find out that, yeah, they're in ICU and they're doing pretty well, things like that. One of my lifetime achievements was getting to be involved with the beginning of the program at John Abbott College, to get that actually started English program with good, not even good, with great paramedics, most of who are advanced. And even the ones that aren't advanced had an advanced attitude compared to the other medics. And so that was a great opportunity to get that program started, bring in the right people, and be able to put that message out that you're talking about the other paramedics, that this is a great job. We need you to help change the system. We need you to be educated so you can have an argument with the doctor. Why can't I start an IV? That doesn't make any sense, you know? So that for me was a real highlight. Becoming one of the first advanced care paramedics in Quebec officially with Jeff and the gang. That was a great moment. I had always said when I became a paramedic, I wanted my name to be written down somewhere in the history of EMS as being involved in the promotion. And just before I retired in 2019, I put out a translation book. I was involved with putting out a translation book with Pascal Caquez from Ahuntsic College. And now I actually have a copy of that book with my name on it. And that's a really proud moment for me as well.
I think you'd be proud. I'll definitely let you jump in here, but I was doing some continuing education at Urgence Santé over the last couple of weeks. And you can see all the names of the paramedics that were working that day. And I can spot at least 50% of them Abbott alumni. Where I work as a first responder in St. Lazare, I always run into John Abbott alumni. I see them run the calls, and I mean, I myself too have those proud moments, but it's incredible knowing that they are paramedics. I mean, how many have we trained so far now throughout the program? If it started 2008.
Jeff?
We don't want to know. I can get you the number, but you don't want to know.
What an impact
it's
that you have.
It's interesting to see. It's interesting to see, like Gary says, that's what makes you proud, is when you see that you actually, we tend to minimize what we do, and we tend to minimize the impact we have, because we're paramedics are in the day-to-day, make a decision now, get it done now. We're fast at fixing stuff, so we don't see the long-term stuff because it's not happening at our pace. But when you sit there and you look back at what you've done, and you look back at what the impact that you've made, like Gary said, coming into John Abbott and starting this, and me coming in, I think it was a year later, and jumping in on stuff, and it was like, wow, you know, somebody actually wants what I have in my head in theirs, you know, so that's pretty interesting. And then you see what you do, and you see some of the people that graduate, some do extremely well, some do average, some do not as well. But that's life. But it's the fact that you have these people coming back. You see them on the ambulance. You see them as first responders. They out of the blue, they send you a thing. Oh, hi, I was thinking about you. Hope everything is cool. That is amazing. You know, that's really cool that people do that. And that we could actually go, this is what I did, you know?
Well, of course, I love seeing on Facebook too, and social media, seeing one of our grads or alumni.
Yeah.
Patient delivered a baby, you know, in the woods. That's incredible.
Yeah, I have it picks up my day when I can bring Evelyn in front of the computer and say, see that paramedic? That was one of my students.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I think we put special people out there, and I think John Abbott does a really good job at putting out special paramedics. Anybody can put out a paramedic. I was teaching with Marco once, and Marco had said to a new class of paramedics, we can teach you to be a paramedic, but we can't teach you to be a good paramedic. You have to have that in you to begin with, you know, where you care about the patient. They never taught me how to make toast for a patient, but I've done that because I know that it's part of the care. It's not just medically that's going to help the family. And I think we put people out, I think, who will be willing to go that extra step. And I know a lot of paramedics who would say from other colleges, who might say, no, that's not my job, sorry, you know, politely, but wouldn't do the step. That's the issue. So yeah, I think we did I'm really proud of everybody that we brought into John Abbott, proud that I was able to be part of getting that program going.
Jeff, did you have a memorable moment that had come to mind, or something that had come to mind before I go on to the next question? Or
there's also good memorable and bad memorable, eh? I just gave you the good stuff.
Sure.
Don't ask us about the bad stuff. There's too much of that too. Well,
I guess not necessarily the bad stuff, but how did you go about handling stress, I guess, throughout the years?
Oh, do you want to know how it worked then? It was then back in the day, it's like get over it or get out. You had to figure it out on your own. There was no program, there was an employee, there was no employee assistance programs. There was no psychologists being brought in. And even when they occasionally started to think about bringing in psychologists back after Jean Santé started, the psychologists freaked out because they had no clue what our job was. And what we were seeing to them was disgusting. It's like, well, how do you look at dead bodies? It's like, well, that's our job. That's what we saw on this call. Oh, I can't handle this. And they would leave the room. So it's not this, it was never the same. It was always, you had to figure out a way of handling it yourself. Some of us had good ways, some of us had worse ways. Some of us, they spent hours and hours and hours in the gym. You could see they were just trying to burn off the stress. Other people chose other recreations to get rid of it. And sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. But now the system is set up so that we know that this is going to happen. We know people are going to be damaged. So we try and prevent it, and we try and take care of them, which we didn't do back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So there is that as an advantage in the system, that we've recognized that we also as first responders get hurt.
Of course.
And we have to take care of ourselves, you know.
I had a crossroad where I changed a little bit. The old days, Jeff will remember this, when we started pushing for paramedics, we used to have bumper stickers that we sold or gave out, and it used to be on the back of our cars and our trucks and everything. And what it said was, paramedics save lives. And that's how I was basically raised as a kid, watching emergency on TV, taking the first aid courses, taking the program. It was in my head when I worked every day that paramedics should be saving lives. And one day I got to a crossroad where, like Jeff said, it was either move on or learn to live with it. And I woke up one day and I realized, you know what, we need to be accepting reality. And the reality is not that paramedics save lives. The reality is that paramedics improve your chance of survival. And as soon as I recognized that, as soon as I realized that was the true job of a paramedic, that was the reality, is that we improve the chance of survival. After that, any call you did, let's say a baby call that normally would just wreck you to hell. After that, instead of thinking paramedic, I should have saved that life, it was, did I improve the chance of survival? And if the answer was yes, then it was easy to say, okay, I did my job, and pat myself on the back and say, okay, tomorrow, let's try it again.
Yes, absolutely right.
Reframing the way you think can have a huge impact. So
yeah,
I guess one last question I had for you. What is life like, I guess, after EMS, after being on the road, obviously going through education as well, but also just through retirement?
Well, Jeff, are you actually retired? I don't think so. If I'm looking at
No,
your
not
office.
yet. Not yet.
So
Not yet.
you just-
Keep trying. They keep sucking me back in.
So you just went from one level of EMS to another.
Yeah.
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 Well, let me tell you what I did. I did the same thing.
Go for it.
There's a problem where I am in Alberta. I'm retired now, retired officially in 2019, where I actually stopped everything. Like I said before, it's way different. There was a while there, I was doing 4 or 5 different jobs, like you, Jeff. We were on the ambulance, we were teaching, we were doing movie standbys, we were working at Bombardier at the same time, we were doing ACLS at McGill, all of this stuff all at the same time. Now I'm doing pretty much nothing, but I found little things to do during the day. I get up when I want. And what I've done now is I miss the ambulance like crazy. It's going to sound very bad, but a part of me hopes somebody smashes their car right in front of me where I am. My first aid kit is still ready to go. I hear somebody scream at the park. Part of me is hoping they fell off the slide, but the other part is hoping that they're just playing. Yeah, it's in your blood. This is like, it's something, some people had it. We were born with it and just didn't know it at the time. So right now what I'm doing is that in Alberta, as across Canada, ambulances are far and few between. Went to the hospital, there's like 9 ambulances parked outside. Response times are over an hour. People are dying while they're waiting for the ambulance. So last year in August, I joined the Cochrane EMS Crisis Group. It's a citizen action group, and I'm attending meetings, and we're taking steps with the government to try and get them to fix the problem. I went to a political rally, never went to one in my life, never went to one in my life before, but I went to a political rally and got up and went to the microphone and explained what was happening in Alberta and that it needed to be fixed. So I'm still sort of in EMS from the other side of it, but I'm still pushing. My son is in EMS, so I'm doing it for him. I'm doing it for the citizens. I might need 911, you never know, so I'm doing it for myself. But once you're in this, you can't look the other way. I think that's the bottom line. But there's less stress of the calls type of thing. If I do any medical, if I give any medical aid, it's completely voluntary. It's not expected. And so that takes the burden off of getting up. I don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in case somebody gets hurt. So yeah, I'm enjoying retirement, and this will be the first year. The plan was summer in Alberta and winter in Arizona. And because of medical issue, the first year, prostate cancer, second and third year, COVID, we haven't been to Arizona yet. So this year we're booked, and that's where I'm going to be in the winter. Even if I have to sneak across the border, if they close the border because of monkeypox, I'm going to come in from the Mexico side because I understand that's wide open.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good.
Enjoy. And any final words before we end this?
No, I think Gary's right. You have to have a plan for when it's over, when you've got something else coming up. And I mean, I do the same thing right now. I mean, I'm still here at John Abbott and I still teach a little bit, but I still do the occasional arena shift. I still do the occasional specialty event or movie set just to keep my hand in. And sometimes it's just that the experience level is different, right? So I see something, I go like, oh, that's interesting. And I don't panic, and other people have never seen it before. And it's like, oh my goodness, what do we do? What do we do? It's like, take a deep breath. You know what to do. Just get it done. I think that's something that Gary and I had a lot of, is getting people to understand that for them, it was an emergency when they called. Once we're there, we know this, we've handled this before. We know what we're doing. And just the fact that you walk in and you go like, I'm cool with this, makes them relax. It makes them cool. And suddenly they realize that they're in good hands and somebody's going to take care of them. And you do. And the impact may not be, oh my God, I saved his life, but you took him to the right place. The doctor did something and realized, oh yeah, look at this. And then 3 or 4 days later, you find out that what the doctor did saved his life, but the fact you got him to the right place at the right time, at the right moment, that had an impact on that decision. So we do this all the time. It's just we don't recognize it because we expect the fast response. And sometimes we need to take a deep breath and go like, did I do the best I could for my patient today? And the answer is yes. Thank you very much. I did my job. Let's go to the next one. Like Gary said, it's not about saving lives. It's about improving their chances. And we can do that, and we can make a huge impact on people on a day-to-day basis.
One of the best part I found of the paramedic job was that you're on your own. You and your partner have to figure things out. It's not like in a hospital you can call a code white or a code blue, or, you know, there's nobody there. You're on your own and you've got to figure out how to solve the problem. I'm going to end off with the fact that I was partners with Jeff for many, many, many years, and it was an honor to work with Jeff. He was a paramedic about 4 years before I was. He was in the first group, I was in the second group, and I learned an awful lot from Jeff. Had a great time. We laughed, we cried, we swore.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, that's the other thing in this field, was that when you're working to save somebody's life and you're working with your partner, that creates a bond. And it was surely an honor working with Jeff. And I sit here in Alberta, retired, thinking about what I started at John Abbott. And I'm really happy to know who the people are that are there still, carrying out my dream of creating good, special paramedics out there. And some of the new people you have, I don't know them, but I know you guys. So I know you probably picked the right people. Great job. I wish I was still doing it, but I'm sort of glad that I'm out of it at the same time.
Of course. Well, again, thank you both, gentlemen. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for everything that you've done for our profession. Thank you for everything you've done for our students here at John Abbott. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Matt. You know where I am and how to reach me if you have any questions.
Perfect.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you guys as well.
Jeff, you take
You
care,
too.
man.
Take
I
care
go
of
for-
yourself, Bear.
Are we